So I think a great place to begin, Bill, is tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story.
There's a whole section in the book about how to answer this question, so I'll see how well I do.
Exactly.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to the questions. Part of my problem is I've written the book about what interests me. Now I need to find out what actually interests other people. So this is a thrill that I can participate in this. You're a part of the launch because it got launched at midnight last night. So myself? Well, first of all, I should say I'm passionate about helping people at all levels reach their full potential. So, and that's important to me because everyone has got something special about them, and many people don't reach their full potential. I started off, oddly enough, as an engineer, a graduate engineer, and became a consultant, and then I got involved in the media. Anyone who's looked at my LinkedIn will see that I've got a very complicated career, but I must say it's been very invigorating and exciting for me. I've ended up working in different countries: Australia, the UK, the US, and Asia. And I've been, over the last 20 years, I've been chairman and MD of various companies. But and if you ask other people what my strengths are, I think they would say I'm a good strategic thinker. I'm a very creative problem solver, and I'm an effective communicator. So those three things, strategic thinking, creative problem solving, communicating, actually turn out to be pretty important in this area of helping people with their careers. And so I moved from engineering, working with machines, to working with people. I did recognize very early on that this was a problem for me. I wrote to the dean of the faculty saying I've just wasted the last 4 years of my life. And I did engineering because I didn't know anything about people. I didn't know anything about money, and I didn't know about how to get anything done. All I knew was mathematics. So I finally worked all that out, and last 25 years, I've been really working with people about their career, senior people mainly, but also quite a few students on their career. Just how should they manage their career?
Beautiful. And having read the book, I was really fortunate to get an advanced copy. You could see the wisdom and the anecdote coming from your own experience, but also the litter of anecdotes that is spread throughout. And I had some great fun trying to work out if I actually knew some of these people. And I did. One person, one of my clients, the CEO, said to me, "Oh yes, I'm Gertrude. I'm in there somewhere." and then Bill assured me that he thought Gertrude did not suit this person. And I agree. I think Gertrude doesn't suit that person as a name. So I still haven't worked out which story is his. But I did spot somebody else, and I thought, oh, I wonder if Julian is my friend. And it turns out he was my friend. So there we go. So there are fascinating, really well-written stories in there that I think are really, really insightful. And I'm sure you wrote the book. I know you wrote the book to do more than just share stories. But what was at the heart of the reason why you put all of this into, a consolidated form in a book? What led you to do that?
Well, it's a very, very interesting area and very human, of course. Everyone faces this question, managing their career. So, and today, more than any time probably in history, jobs are not secure. No job is secure. And anyone, I think any thoughtful person should be thinking about, well, what happens if I don't continue in this role? Or is it the right role for me? What should I be doing? Particularly as life become longer, if you're 40 or 45, you're only halfway through your adult productive life. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be working to 75, in my view. You may not want a full-time job. You may not want to be working 60 hours a week, but you might have some kind of portfolio career. I personally don't like the idea of retirement at all. I think most of us want to remain productive. So if no job is secure, and if people's productive lives are getting longer, what should they do about it? And the weird thing is, if you're if you have lost your job or you're not happy with your job, if you Google, what do I do? You don't get very much useful information. You get, I think the kind of information you get is have some coffees with people and meet some recruiters, which actually is totally counterproductive at the beginning. You shouldn't be doing that. I tell my people that I work with, don't meet anyone for a month, and don't meet recruiters until you've been properly prepared. So I've tried to come up with a process. The book starts for when you decide you don't really like your job or someone's told you they don't need you anymore, to when you're re-established in a new role and trying to work out, is this the right solution for me? Because one thing you can be pretty sure of is that no position description describes the position. All it describes is the shop window, beautifully lit and beautifully prepared on the street. What's happening in the storeroom at the back could be total chaos. So, part of your job as you're looking for a job is to try to figure out what the real job is. So the book is my attempt to provide some rigor to this whole, and to show there is a process that works. I worked with 1,000 people, so I've slowly got to grips with this. And I think in my own mind, there is definitely a process that works. And most people don't use it. Most people believe if I'm authentic and genuine and do a little bit of homework, I'll be fine. But it's really not as easy as that. And so I felt I should try to put down the process that I use and just see whether anyone else can make it successful. But also, I'm very lucky that I've met so many really outstanding people in my career. And so I've got some stories about Gertrude and others. If you're in there, you could well be in there if you work with me, but your name, you probably changed from female to male or vice versa, and you've probably got you will have a new name for sure. And the story might have been slightly modified to suit my purposes, but because most of the stories are very short. But I think that's what adds. These are life skills which are not taught at university or school that I can figure out. And in fact, they're not really easy to find out about until you do this. So it's really a life skill book. It's more than just how do you build a career. It's really how do you manage this part of your life. And it's more than jobs, of course, it's your family as well. You don't want to die at your desk and lose your family. You want to have a successful family and a successful career. So how do you manage that? So the book is actually full of questions. It's not possible to answer specific questions for each person because everything is so situational. But there are some general approaches that seem to me to be worthwhile putting down. So when I started, I basically thought, I could put down everything I know and then no one needs me anymore. But I've convinced myself that it's actually the reverse, that people like me are actually quite useful for most individuals going through this because they need someone to bounce their ideas off. They can't. It's a bit like a book on skiing. You can read a book on skiing, but you can't ski. Well, I would say you can read this book. You'll learn, I hope you'll learn quite a lot of ideas and will give you more confidence. Because one of the problems in this whole process is you don't know whether it's you or them. If you have a setback, is it me, or is it them? No one tells you that. So it can be it can cause a lot of anxiety. And if it's taking time, is there something wrong with me, or is there, or does it just take time? So the book, I hope, will help people who don't have a coach to at least gain more confidence and figure out what works. And a lot of it, by the way, is counterintuitive. You don't ask for a job. Asking for a job is almost the worst thing you can do. You ask for advice. And you're talking about Not knowing what your strengths are is a major issue for you if you can't explain your strengths. And yet most people can't explain their strengths. So not to begin with. And also they can't explain them briefly. If you can't, they make it too complicated. The average CV is read in less than 16 seconds. So what does someone reading a CV in 16 seconds learn about you? Not much, just a few jobs and maybe what your degree is and where you live. That's about it. So people over-engineer their CVs. They think my job is to write a CV. I spend perhaps 20 minutes on your CV. I spend 20 hours sort of working with you to work out what makes you special, how do you communicate that, where are you likely to fit, where should you be fishing, what ponds do you fish in, how do you explain yourself, how do you handle interviews, all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot to this process, and it's very surprising that it hasn't been documented properly.
I think, one of the things that you said when we began speaking as well was that there's advice out there which, as I think you said, was pretty general and superficial and not terribly helpful, and you've managed to make it very precise and quite specific, which is useful. And there's an extra twist on it, and I've read it, and with the lens of, as somebody, in my early 50s, if I were going, would this be valuable for me? Then yes, absolutely. But then also with two sons who are graduating from university, would this be useful for them as well? And my takeaway is that it's a process that they would find incredibly useful and insightful, but also there was, a load of gems in there for me. And Bill has anchored this book around 7 steps, sort of 7 guiding principles, which form steps really that you can walk through. And a number of them seem to me to be hold back and really think and be careful, as he mentioned before. Don't, in the first month, don't speak to anyone. And why don't we begin there, Bill? Because why not? If you know you're about to be let go, or you've made the decision that you want to move on, it's not necessarily that somebody else has decided you want to change. You've decided to make a change, and that could be as simple as just deciding, okay, I need to get strategic about my career. It could be that you've just been rolling along and not planning. So it could be that. But why do you say don't tell anyone? Why do you say just go back in your house and stay there, don't talk? Why do you say that?
Well, you can talk to me, but or to anyone who's helping you, but don't talk to anyone else. Well, most people, they live a life where they get 100 emails before breakfast, and they're pretty strung out, and the whole process of leaving is very stressful for a lot of people. And there's a definite process. There's an ending process, there's a transition process, and there's a new beginning. And I want you to be seen at your best. I don't want you to be worn out and anxious when you go and meet people. So why would you want to meet people when you're not at your best? So how are you going to be at your best? Well, first of all, you're going to have some rest. You're going to eat properly. You're going to get some exercise. Secondly, you're going to be properly prepared. So what does that mean? Well, you can explain your strengths. You're confident about them. You sell yourself from strengths, not from weakness. And yet too many people sort of talk about what the problems are. We've got to talk about what the strengths are. No one is perfect for any job. I think in America they call you a purple squirrel if you meet every requirement of the job. There aren't any purple squirrels around. Everyone's too tall, too short, too white, too black. Whatever it is, there's always problems. The problem is how to emphasize your strengths. And then the second, and prepare. You must rehearse. You can't expect that you'll sort of ad-lib stuff, and yet nearly everyone does. They assume if I'm a decent human being and explain what I'm about, that's just fine. Well, it doesn't work out that way. What's in your head doesn't necessarily come out of your mouth. People can't answer the question, what do you do, very well. They talk about their job. They don't talk about what value they add or what makes them special. They can't answer the question, tell me about yourself. It takes them 15 minutes and they go through every job they've had since they left school. That's not interesting. I had one person who unfortunately, I had an interview on the first day I met them, and they were head of risk at a bank, and they were asked a brilliant question, I thought, which was, how do you manage risk? Now, this is a dreadful question to answer, and they managed to mess it up entirely by going through the whole process of risk management at a bank. It took them half an hour. Of course, they never got another interview. What they should have asked is, what kind of risk do you have in mind? They had to narrow the question, and then they had to answer it in less than 2 minutes. I don't think you should take more than 2 minutes answering any question, because you don't necessarily know what interests the listener. And the chances are you could bore them, and they're thinking about what they're having for dinner by the time you've finished. Then the third thing is, you've got to be strategic. Too many people are tactical in this area. They worry about, I've got this defect or that defect, or does this job suit me or that job suit me? I'd like you to be physically and mentally in good shape. I'd like you to have gone through the process so you are very confident. And even the best people are not confident. In fact, the higher you are in the organization, the less confident you are. You've gone from being in charge to being helpless, really. You've got people promise things, they don't deliver. They come up with fairly simple solutions to your problem, like meet a recruiter. The worst thing you can do is meet a recruiter until you're prepared. So get prepared, and then finally have a strategy. Where am I heading? How can I explain to people what I'm trying to do? In 3 or 4 or 5 years, where would I like to be? Because if you can tell people where you'd like to be, then they can help you get there. Just talking about the next job is not a very good idea in my mind. So they're the 3 reasons that I believe you shouldn't rush into it.
Yes. Okay. So it's really important just to take stock and to really put yourself in a really strong position. And excuse me, part of that also, one other thing you mentioned early on in your process as well, and you hit on it earlier, is to say, don't ask for a job, ask for advice. Talk me through that, because I think that also speaks to why it's part of not rushing out the door, isn't it? If you think if you're in a bit of a panic and think, oh my word, I don't have a job anymore, I better get busy, I've got to find something, I've got commitments, and you race out and start to ask people for a job, your posture's all wrong, isn't it? But why is asking for advice the way to go here, not asking for a job?
Well, virtually everyone is happy to give you advice. The problem is to get the right advice and to get helpful advice. And virtually no one knows how to find you a job. They freeze up. People come to me. One person came to me and said, look, if you're any good at your job, you should find me a job in the next 8 weeks. And I said, well, you don't understand what my job is. I'm like a personal trainer. I'm trying to make you match fit. I'm not finding you a team to play in, that sort of thing. You've got to do the work, but I help you prepare. So that's why, and I believe part of the selling process for you, and by the way, this is a competitive process. Even if you're on the short list for a job, there's still 4 other people. If you believe there's 5 people on the short list, you're only one of 5. There's going to be 4 people rejected. So it's a ghastly process, really. And it's even worse than being in a regular competition, because you don't know who the competition is. You don't know what their strengths are versus yours. And the people making the decision quite often make it, it's an art, not a science. They make the decision based on their own preconceptions and to some degree, what kind of emotional connection you've managed to bond with them. It's not, people don't select people on the basis of competence. Their first thing is, do I trust you? So how do you generate trust? Well, I think you generate it by asking questions, not by telling people how good you are. To start with, telling people how good you are makes you very vulnerable, because it may not matter. What you're good at may not matter to them. You need to find out what they need and then tell stories to help them understand you can deliver the goods, that you'd be a very good candidate for this role. I was talking to one recruiter and he said the worst part of our job is telling people they haven't got the job. You know, we've disrupted their family, we've disrupted their life at some level, and then we tell them, sorry, you missed out. So asking for advice allows you to build rapport because people love giving advice.
So you, in a sense, giving them an opportunity to help, aren't you, rather than asking something from them. It's a different positioning, isn't it?
And it's very, very bad for you when they say, I can't think of a job that would suit you, or, you know, I don't know any jobs. In a way, you've cut off the relationship at that point. They've said, all right, I can't help you, goodbye. Whereas you never know. They next week they might come across something that would suit you. So, you know, I'm all about building an emotional connection. And it's not just for the next job, it's for the rest of your career. You, particularly if you don't have a job, you've got this opportunity to network, which you will not be given again. You know, I talk to people that I work with, and I ask them to meet 5 people a week when they're networking. I'd like them to meet 50 new people. It sounds incredibly tough. You know, how could I do that? But in fact, if you ask for advice and you can frame the problem so people can give you useful advice, I would love to be doing this kind of work in the next 3 years. And I realize I might need to get some more credentials to get there, or I might have to have another job to position myself for it. Then they understand where you're trying to go and you can test your thinking with them. That's another problem a lot of people don't do. They don't test their concepts with other people, so they don't really know whether other people agree with them or not, particularly people who know them. So
that's as a senior person, that becomes increasingly challenging, doesn't it? Because if I take out some of the learnings from your book and apply it when you're in a job as well as when you're thinking of getting a job, that's one of the big lessons that I think you also give, and that is ask other people for advice, ask them for suggestions, and listen. And in one of your points, it seems to me, about holding back, and it's, you know, don't speak to anyone for the first month and then do some other things to get really ready, is to find opportunities to listen, but also to ask. There's a bit of the McKinsey in you still, in that, you know, really ask for you know, really strong feedback. You know, ask people to be really, give permission for people to be really clear and straight with you. Yes,
well, you know, I like to get your referees involved at the very beginning of the process, because they, in theory at least, know you better than a lot of other people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be using them as referees. So you should be testing your concept. You know, in the book, I talk about something called a framework for seeking advice. And this is a structure that I put together to help people work out how to seek advice, because you don't want to be all over the map. You want to have a way of, first of all, asking or telling people, you know, I believe I've got the capacity to run a business in 3 years' time, say. Or I don't have a, you know, I think I should be a number 2 or number 3, or I should be head of a department, whatever it is. People will tell you, look, in the book I talk about one person who had never thought of leading a business. Everyone said, look, you're nuts. You should be a chief executive. You know, why haven't you thought of that? And in her case, she explored this and everyone agreed that's what she should be doing. And in the end, she ended up getting a job at that level, but she'd never considered that before.
And I think that's an interesting thing too, isn't it? When asking people for advice or getting the referees in, and you suggest this, to ask other people ask them to tell you what your strengths are, can be incredibly affirming at a time of potentially great upset. But also, to your point there, people will tell you things that it's never occurred to you that you could actually do something. They actually think more highly of you than you think of yourself. Isn't that so often the case?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we all are very aware of our defects. You don't sell yourself by talking about your defects. You sell yourself by talking about your strengths. And most people, despite the fact that, there might be 20 requirements on a position description. They make a decision on the basis of 2 or 3 major attributes of you, and we've got to find out what they are, and that's another reason why we're asking, of course. I talk in the book about a concept called spin selling, which is a questioning technique to try to understand what the customer really wants. And I believe you sell yourself by being a very good questioner, because they can see you're smart. They can see that you're interested, that you're passionate. And it's a combination of asking good questions and telling good stories. I've done this before. I talk about this young refugee in the book who had 500. He applied for 500 jobs. He was a first-class honours graduate. He was an extraordinary human being. He had gone through incredibly tough few years. He ended up on Christmas Island for a year and learned English there. He learned English at the age of 15 and he got 99.9 or something. He's year 12, extraordinary young man. Couldn't get a job. Why? It just doesn't calibrate. Got 20 interviews, 500 applications, 20 interviews, no job. It was just fortuitous. A friend of mine said, look, could you talk to this young man? He's very able, but he can't get a job. Well, when we used the process in the book, he found an extraordinary job in 3 months. Now, how did he do that? Well, he hadn't told anyone what he'd gone through. His whole process of seeking a job was to talk about, he got this arts degree at Melbourne University and so on. When he told me what he'd been through, I then told half a dozen friends, look, we've got to help this fellow. This is what he's been through. Well, it turned out that his big selling point was his resilience and he worked midnight to, I think it was 10 p.m. till 3 a.m. at Crown Casino to earn money to pay his parents' rent, for God's sake, while he was at university. Now, how many Australian kids are paying their parents' rent? And so this was a huge, for me at least, a huge selling point. And it turned out that he's got this really fabulous job now through networking. But he didn't have a clue about networking. He didn't have much network. He'd only come to Australia 4 years earlier, or 5 years earlier. But you can still, even if you've got no network, you can still build a network. You just need to find someone to start you off and ask them for advice. And part of the advice is, how do I build my network?
And you illustrate there one of the principles that you talk about in the book really perfectly as well. And you talked about A, B, and C levels in your network. So A levels being your intimate friends and colleagues that you know really well. And then B level being that one level removed from that. And you, in effect, were B level person to that young man.
That's right.
And I think you said that it's that second ring, that, I don't remember if you called them first, second, third, or ABC, but that second ring is the most useful to you because they're sort of close to you, but a bit further away. And so there's opportunity, they would see opportunity in finding opportunities for you to, it makes them feel good to be helpful, but it's not so risky for them, I suppose, because they're not so closely connected to you.
Yeah, well, there's actually some academic work done on this, that most opportunities come from people you don't know. Or you know very little. Why? Because they don't have all the baggage of sort of knowing your defects and where you came from and what. They see the strengths, your strengths, if you can explain your strengths. Because I talk about 3 levels, the A group, which is really surrounding you. They're people you know, and they're people who care about you and want to help you. You've got to be able to explain to them what you're trying to achieve. Then they introduce you to the B, the next circle out, the B list, and then C list is the third circle out. Now, most jobs come from the C list. They're people you don't know. But I've had, one candidate came from South Africa. One person I was working with came from South Africa. He went back to the first boss he ever had when he came to Australia. That was his A list. That person introduced him to a consulting firm he was familiar with. And the person in the consulting firm turned out to be the B list. The consultant then introduced him to one of their clients who turned out to be, who's the C list, and who offered him a job, even without a CV, because there was so much trust at each step. Trust is fundamental. If you don't trust someone, you're not going to employ them. But each individual, A, B, C, all trusted the others. And in the end, this person, and 5 years later, he's still in the job. So it turned out to be a good job for him.
And you talk about something just there as well, which you raise quite a bit in the book, which is one of the key elements of the recruiting process, if we flip it that way, is your CV. And you talk a little bit about CVs and how you've mentioned already that somebody will give your cover letter and your CV 16 seconds in that first review, which is not very long at all. I think we joked when we were doing one of our preparatory calls, I give people 30 seconds. I tell them to get their message across in 30 seconds. And yet, you're being even tougher. But you talk about something else, not the CV, not the cover letter. You talk about having a 2-page note about yourself, and I'm just blanking on what you call it, a professional profile.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What's that for? What's that all about? That's something I've not seen anybody do before.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if anyone else does it. I do it because I want you to have a marketing document, not a CV. Most CVs are very administrative. They list all the jobs you've had. They may sort of set out some achievements. The achievements may be pretty, not very highly, I like quantified achievements. What's your impact? Have you made an impact? And quite a lot of the achievements are, I had this job, or I worked on this process, or there's no impact. I'm working with the university professor at the moment. What's your impact? Well, this is actually turning out to be quite a challenge. It's hard for me to measure my impact. I teach. So, but we've got to be able to work out what difference did he make. It's not, you can't just teach. You've got to have someone who learns. How do we figure out what people have learned? So that's a challenge. But the professional profile, to me, is a very powerful document, because it's my way of getting you to explain that you've got a track record of success, because I'm trying to show you're a leader with energy and very good judgment. I reckon if you're a leader with energy and good judgment, people want to talk to you. It doesn't matter whether you're an accountant or a marketing or an HR person, but people want to talk to leaders with energy and good judgment. So if you can show you've got that and a track record of success, then you've got a lot going for you. Most people confuse the problem by saying too much and writing too much. They mistake, well, this is your game, you can actually speak to this, but no, it's one author said, give me 1 day, I'll write 10 pages. If you give me 10 days, I'll write 1 page. And that's the problem, is most people don't invest enough time in their CV. And these people who write CVs for you, I don't think they invest enough time in understanding what makes you special. They write a beautiful document for you, but they don't actually probe. And I warn people when they come and work with me that I'm going to stress test their thinking. I'm not just going to write it down and say you're a wonderful person. So the professional profile, in a way, is a process for stress testing your thinking.
Absolutely.
And it's really the last 10 years. Yeah, because I don't think people want to spend a lot of time worrying about what you did 30 years ago.
No.
So what are the big jobs, and how can you explain them simply? Many job titles are incomprehensible. You can't actually figure out what they did. So sometimes I don't even use job titles. I just say in charge of something, or lead, that kind of thing, managed, transformed, And then the other thing is it talks about groups of achievement. I don't know how many people have read Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel says his favorite 2 equations are success in life, it depends on being competent and lucky. Great success in life depends on being somewhat more competent and very lucky. So he points out that luck is a big factor. So how do you improve your luck?
Yes.
That's one of the questions. And clearly, by expanding your network, you've got more opportunities for input. And by doing your homework, you prepare yourself better. It's the old golfing adage, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And so people need to practice. They need to test their thinking. I give the story in my book about Laurence Olivier, who was a very successful stage actor, but wasn't, to begin with, much good at film acting. And he complains he had to do 70 takes of one sequence before the director was happy with him. And so isn't that interesting that someone who's a sort of preeminent stage actor couldn't act in a movie or wasn't doing what was needed in a movie? So you could be preeminent in a field, but not so good in another field. We don't want you wasting it too much. We want you playing from strength. And the professional profile actually has a lot of uses. That's why I like it. It's time consuming to put together, and it's quite challenging. But it's, first of all, it makes you think, makes you be very logical. But the other thing I haven't talked about is, I like this idea that you send out the 10 of your closest confidants, people you've worked with, who've seen you at your best. They're the only people who've seen you at your best, and ask them what makes you special. Because what you think makes you special may be wrong or half-baked or weak. You'll be simply amazed. This is a particular problem in Australia, by the way. I think people don't go out of their way to compliment other people. They, you walk on water in Australia and they point out it wasn't very deep and you didn't walk very far. But in America, they clean your teeth in the morning and they think you're a national hero. So it's it's a slightly different culture. But if you ask people what makes you special, you'll be simply amazed at what they say.
Because people, even Australians will compliment you, won't they? And even Australians feel good complimenting somebody else. So I love your analogy there about you walked on water, but it was open, and people tell you it wasn't very deep. But, genuinely, when you do ask, if I'm looking at the questions coming in too, people are talking about tips for networking and also that notion of personal brand. And I think you're answering both of those things.
The other problem, I think HR directors can't resist sending out, what are your development needs? I'm not interested in your development needs particularly. I am at some level, if you obviously don't meet the requirements for a particular role, but I'm more interested in what makes you special and emphasizing that. So, and by just asking what makes you special, people are much more forthcoming. Most people are simply staggered by the feedback they receive. It's hugely motivating to find that other people think you're very good at something.
Yes.
And you can refer to this. The super salesmen that I've worked with actually carry around their feedback with them, and they plonk it in front of their client. When they're asked, what kind of leader are you? They say, don't ask me, see what other people say about me. And of course, they've edited it down. It's not like 200 pieces of feedback. It was 20 key ideas. But I think, first of all, it forces you to think very clearly. Why do you have a professional profile? It forces you to think clearly. It forces you to summarize your story. It provides the highlights of the last 10 years. It sets out your senior roles and explains what impact you've had. It should, most CVs don't explain you're a leader or that you've got good judgment. They say you've had a whole lot of jobs.
Yes.
How do I know whether you're a good leader or not? I want you to be a leader. I want you to make a difference. Then it also shows you've got other interests above and beyond your work and your career, which most people, if they're trying to build some kind of emotional connection with you, want to know more about you. What do you have a family? What are you passionate about? So those kind of things. And finally, it's a good thing to leave with people when you're networking, because it's sort of a prompter. They're not going to read a lot, but it's because it's so. If you read the book, you'll see it's very structured. And it's very symmetrical. It's not all over the map. You read most CVs and they've got 3 lines on one point and 1 line on another and 6 lines on something else. It's messy. This is very sort of carefully tailored. The dot points take 1 or 2 lines. They don't take 5 lines. And they're symmetrical. So it's hard work. And then finally, it helps you write a very good LinkedIn profile, because you sort of understand what impact you're having. You don't just sort of talk on your LinkedIn about what I've done and I've had a great time doing this and that. It's more about, I want you to emphasize your achievements and your impact. Yeah. And most people can't do that. They haven't done it. They can do it, but they need some help.
Help for sure.
Do that, and so that's why I like the professional profile. That it involves quite a lot of work to do it, and you really need to get someone to critique it, someone who knows how to write and how to communicate to critique it, because even the most capable senior managers, CEOs, can't write a professional profile. I've never given more than 5 out of 10 for their first attempt for anyone.
And you seem so nice, Bill. You seem so generous and full of compliments.
Well, those of you who work with me know this phenomenon. I give you scores because I want you to know where you stand. It's not much point saying, "Oh, this is quite good." You might as well know, look, this is 2 out of 10. You need to do a lot of work on this. We need to do a lot of work. I'm going to help you, but it's not good enough. You're not showing yourself at your best. I make the point in the book that if you can explain yourself briefly, explain what makes you special briefly in writing and verbally, you are immediately special, because most people can't do it.
Yes, and I think that's a really good point to segue, because one thing I didn't say early on is that Bill used to share an office with Barbara Minto. And so, in my world, that's really, really high praise. And naturally, he asked me, given he knows what I do, and I was evaluated by Barbara Minto with the work that I do, he asked me to read his book and provide him feedback on the structure and the storyline. And I have been struggling to find improvements in that regard. I've given him a few suggestions, but I can assure you it's very, very well written. And he has taken the time to walk his talk with what he's saying in terms of his own process, to really surface the really helpful 7-step, 7 principles, which is a bit like a process as well, to really crystallize that and make it very, very clear for people so it's easy to grasp. Sorry, Bill.
See, that's another issue. The university and school doesn't teach you to communicate very well. I think things are much better than they used to when I went through, but it wasn't really until I became a management consultant that I understood that top management aren't interested in complicated slides and hundreds of words. They want to know what the bottom line is. So how do you distill everything? That's a big issue. And, you help people do that. So you can talk more about that than I can. But you can, if you can't sort of see what the person's trying to communicate quickly and easily, why would people want to invest a lot of time reading a CV? I make the point in the book that I don't blame people for not reading CVs. Most of them are too complicated. They're unstructured. They haven't had enough thought given to them. They don't use the right language. They're administrative. You read most CVs, you'll go to sleep.
Yes.
You test it on yourself. You read your own CV, you'll go to sleep. It's not a good exercise for most people, in my view.
But I think the covering letters can be similar too. There's such a marketing opportunity, aren't they, to write them really well and keep them to ideally 1 page, 2 at the most, to really do what you've described there and describe what it is that makes you special. In our language, we talk about the so what, but what is the so what about you? What is it that makes you special in your world? And I think what I'd like to do at this point is just explain a couple of things before we segue to talking more openly about questions and so on. And
just one, sorry to interrupt, but one point on cover letters. Only 50% of them are read. Now, a lot of recruiters won't read them because they feel that they're just fluff, person's waffling. The heart of the matter for them is what jobs have you had, what impact have you had. So they don't read them. But I recommend that you try to use, before you apply for anything, you speak to the recruiter, or better still, the person doing the actual employing, and find out what they want. Then the cover letter should be positioned around what are they looking for. It's I fill your needs, not I'm a great person who's done 55 different things. It's your need, thank you for talking to me. I understand your needs to be X, Y, and Z. I have got a track record of delivering outstanding results for each of those kind of needs. So again, the work needs to be tailored to the situation, and too many people don't do that. They write, like this young man, 500 applications. I can guarantee he didn't talk to anyone before he wrote his application. It probably was the same application for 500 jobs.
Yes.
It shouldn't be. We should know what the job is.
And there's a temptation to do the same application just because this is such a time-consuming process, isn't it? And it is a lot of work. Even at the graduate level, I'm watching one of my sons go through that process at the moment, and just seeing it's really like a full-time job in finding a job while he's finishing his final exams. There's a lot of work at that level, even, let alone at that more senior level where you've really got to be that much more bespoke about what you're offering. So I think you raise a really good point there, and I'm intrigued that they don't even read them.
No. Forget it. All the work you're doing is been shredded.
My goodness.
50% of the work. It's a problem. But it's because they don't think there's any substance in them. But if you've got
bad ones.
five dot points to say, I know what this job is and I can do it, then you've got a fighting chance they will read it.
Yeah. Okay. So making it skimmable and really powerful as well is really, really important. Okay.
Yeah, well, for me, I don't think you should ever write more than 4 lines in a paragraph. I just don't think people read dense text. It's the same on LinkedIn, by the way. Someone gets carried away with 20 lines on their LinkedIn in one paragraph. Forget it. No one's going to read it except your best friends and your relatives.
And your best friends are going to tell you they read it. They're not actually going to read it. That's the problem with asking people, who really care about you, really close people, they don't want to do what needs to be done, which is to give you the hard feedback. Now, we all have an opportunity to spend a bit more time with Bill if we'd like to do that in a few moments. We've still got some time left on this call for those of you who've got time, but also I guess just to let you know a couple of things. So those people who do join Clarity First, my communication program, have an opportunity to work directly with Bill, and it is open today for a week at the moment. And so we're going to be running a couple of workshops together during January, one on the 18th and one on the 2nd of February. So anyone who's a member of Clarity First at that time will have an opportunity to be part of a book group discussion on the 18th of January, and also to help work up, what it is that makes you special as part of your own process at that session in February. So we're very, very much looking forward to doing that. And the other thing is that Bill has really generously offered to offer the first 10 people who join Clarity First a free copy of his book. So that is open, and I will put the links in the chat in a moment for anyone who might be interested. And I'm aware that we've got some people in the program who are here with us as well. So there's some opportunities to continue working with Bill if you'd like to do that. And I think when we set this session up, we offered people an opportunity to ask questions, and we've had, a really great deluge of questions. And I think we might segue to some of those now. One of the things that Bill and I noticed, well, there were two things that we noticed actually in those questions. One of them was that they were working from weakness. People were very often putting forward, well, what do I do with this problem that I have? What do I do if I'm a senior professional and perhaps I come from an overseas background and I feel like that, cultural background is holding me back. I don't get offered the job, the senior role, and yet someone else gets it, then I'm asked to come in and clear up the mess afterwards. What do I do then? What do I do if I have English as a second language is a common question. What do I do if I'm being pigeonholed in some way because I've been in a particular type of role? And so, Bill, we talked about these being sort of tactical questions, but also working from weakness, didn't we? What's your strategy for overcoming that? Is it as simple as not simple, but as simple as focus on your strengths, just forget about those things that you're worried about, understandably concerned about, and focus on your strengths? Or are there some other things that people can do?
Well, I mean, first of all, I should just add to your original comment. So reasons that I won't bore you with, I'm actually, if you want an ebook, you can get it for $10 approximately for the next 2 weeks. So it's very inexpensive to get the book in ebook form. Just wanted to put that in case people didn't, because I do want people to ask questions based on the book when we work. The whole idea of not doing it next week, but rather doing it in 2 months is you have an opportunity to read the book, because I want questions that are, I don't understand, or you make it sound too easy, or you haven't really tackled the problem I face. Those kind of questions would be very, very helpful in our sessions next year. So, do you want to just repeat your question again so I can?
Absolutely. Just was our observation that people were asking tactical questions focused on their weaknesses rather than, and then focusing on their strengths. And is it as simple as thinking about what's special about you, or is there more to it than that?
Well, I think, this is a team effort, by the way. You can't get a job by yourself. It's a vote generating process. It's a bit like an Oscar. You might make the world's best movie, but you won't necessarily win an Oscar. Why? Because it's a totally different process. You need to generate votes from the Academy. And people vote for different reasons. They don't necessarily vote because you produced the best movie, or they've got different views of what the best movie is. And it's like a political process. You can't stand for Parliament and have no one helping you win votes. So that's why this networking is so important. You've got to build, in the old days, I used to say it's an activity-based process. You can't just sit at home and wait for the phone to ring and write applications. You've got to get out there and meet people. Now I say it's a vote-winning process. People don't vote for you unless they've got some emotional connection. So if you haven't built an emotional connection, you're paddling upstream to begin with. You're just another one in the list who's got some credentials, and you don't know whether your credentials are good, bad, or indifferent. So the tactical, to me, people aren't strategic enough in this process. They need to think, where are they going? How am I going to get there? How can I co-opt other people to help me generate ideas? And, and just applying for jobs and so on is pretty soul destroying.
Absolutely.
So it's really, and I think these tactical questions, the problem with them is, for me, is I need to know a lot more about you before I could really give you advice. What have you done? What the problems seem to be? Who's helping you? Who's supporting you? Have you co-opted them? Do they really understand what you can achieve? Are they willing to go into bat for you and vote for you? In your process, you need a recruiter or someone internally or externally to vote for you. Then you need some executives to vote for you. Then you need the chief executive, maybe. Then you might need the board to vote for you. How do you get the votes? And I had one man who was going for a chief executive role in a business, and the chairman, it was a dairy farming business. So the chairman took him out to visit dairy farms. And at the end of the day, and my man, he's dressed in a pinstripe suit and so on, so it wasn't really very, he'd messed up the whole personal presentation thing to begin with. But then at the end of the day, the chairman told him, look, I think you're too strategic for this job. We need someone get their hands dirty, milk a cow or whatever. He said, no, you've got a lot of attributes. I'll let you present to the board. And so my man went to present to the board. And at the end of the meeting, the board said, we think you're too tactical. You're too operational. You're not strategic enough. So,
how do you handle that?
Yeah, well, I think he hadn't asked enough questions. He'd been too busy talking about himself and saying what he thought they wanted to hear, and instead of asking them what they wanted. Because he could have easily, and that can happen in a meeting. That can happen in a board meeting. You can start a conversation, not just present. You're in a weak position when you don't know what they're thinking and you're presenting your ideas. The best presentation I've ever seen was a guy who got a very big job. He had 5 slides. 4 of them were photographs. One was, it said, I come from strong stock. And it had a picture of his grandfather in a ironworks in Wales with a big hammer covered in soot, drinking beer, I think. Then the next one is, I love my family. And he showed his children and his wife. Then I've worked in a lot of countries, and he had a map of the world and he had little flags on each country. The next one was, I've made a big difference. And he showed his last job, the before and after. And then the last one, I can make a big difference to you. And they hired him.
Isn't that fantastic? And takes such confidence, just quiet, comfortable confidence. I'd say it takes comfort even more than confidence to present like that in a board. And I think, in the work that I do, I see people being so intimidated by the idea of presenting to senior leaders or presenting to the board. And I have to say to them, look, they're human beings, they're people, they're very accomplished, they're very time poor, but they are human beings. And to come in with a sense of, I'm going to say comfort rather than confidence, but to be comfortable in that place, comfortable enough to be confident in your own discipline and ask questions and find out what they really want to know, rather than being stiff and up the front and just talking, and at that very great risk of talking too loudly or too quickly, or present, because of your nerves, showing off every tick that you might have, and we all have them.
By the way, he pulled this off because he knew a lot about their business and them. He'd done a lot of research. He talked to some of them beforehand. He understood what they wanted. So he didn't need to give them, 5 slides on all his capabilities. I guarantee he wouldn't have got the job if he did that.
Yes. So there's a very, very good lesson there in doing your homework, but also talking to potentially intimidating people.
Yeah, because the big question for most people is, do I want to work with you? Can I put up with you every day? Not everyone. Most people I work with, there's no question about their competence or capability. It's more about the fit. I believe there's 5 things that a hiring person has got in their mind. One is, can I trust you? And human beings have got an extraordinary capacity to size other human beings up very, very quickly. If you read Amy Cuddy's book on presence, she says they do it in seconds. The second thing is, can you do the job? The problem from my point of view is that quite often the interviewers don't really know what the job is. They don't understand all the complexity of the job. Only 1/3 of chief executives only last 18 months.
Wow.
Why is that? How can you be hired as a chief executive and you don't make it for more than 18 months? It's because they've got the board has got, they don't understand how complex the job is, and the person being hired assumes that people want to change. And it's just the reverse. Why should I change just because I got a new chief executive? So there's the second thing is, can I do the job? Can you do the job? Now, your job is to find out as much as you can about what is the job. And if the job involves crisis management, you better have some stories about how you've managed crises. If the job is kind of steady as you go, then you better have some stories about how do you manage something, make it, continuous improvement or whatever. The next question I think they're asking is, do you fit? And the more senior you are, the more important the fit question. If you're hiring a graduate, you don't sort of spend a lot of time on fit, most likely. But if you're hiring someone senior, we're thinking a lot about fit. And the fourth thing I think they're thinking about is, do you want the job? So you can't really, I want you to be a reluctant bride, but I don't want you to be so reluctant that they don't carry forward the interview. I want you to say, look, strategically, this job looks very, very interesting. I think I can make a big contribution, but I need to understand more detail. And then the fifth thing I think the interviewing group is thinking about is themselves. Do I look good if I hire this person?
That's one I wouldn't have thought of, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because it's very, very bad news if I hire someone who doesn't turn out well. It reflects on me.
And so a big proportion of boards come off with egg on their face because they made a mistake it looks like they may not have actually made a mistake, but it looks like they made a mistake in hiring the CEO. That's really bad news, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, boards are particularly public company boards, are very aware that the announcement is going to stock exchange. So if they get all their friends calling and saying, you've got a fantastic person there, they're pretty happy. If they get their friends saying, I can't understand why you made that appointment, this is not what they want to hear.
No, absolutely. And look, that's a really, like, one of many counterintuitive points in the book, isn't it? That this is not all about you, it's also about the other side.
Precisely.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So and people who are here, please do feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. What are some of the biggest, give us some stories, some examples of people who've had really big challenges that you've helped them overcome. You talked about your young friend who was on this island. What about some other people who've had big challenges that they've been able to overcome?
Yeah, well, I think the main challenge or the main opportunity for most people is to improve the process, to emphasize their strengths, communicate them well, prepare properly, rehearse out loud to someone. I make the point in the book that TED Talk, I don't know how many of you have seen TED Talks, but they're 12 or 15 minutes. But the preparation time is between 50 and 100 hours for a TED Talk. So most of my people I work with assume a couple of run-throughs, 10 minutes of rehearsal will be just fine. I'm saying, well, I don't really think you're going to show yourself at your best if you rehearse twice for something. How come a TED Talk needs to have 50 hours and you can do it in 15 minutes? This is rather an odd situation. Now, but most of us are not, we've never been in a public place where we've been criticized, where we've had professional critics. I'm about to go through this with my book, but all my friends have said it's good, but I'm about to find out from other people that I've taken too long to make a point or something or other.
So that's people who don't know you, who don't have any relationship to lose by telling you they don't like it. Is that what you're saying? Yes.
Yeah. Well, they want to be nice to me. So I've got to have people like your group here looking at it and saying, well, there's only one thing I really think is valuable here. But mind you, even one valuable thing could be
absolutely
could change your life.
Absolutely.
And this is a life-changing, if you do this well, it can be life-changing.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the next job, as I said earlier, it's the whole career. Because I think There are 5 things you need to think about. I've talked about the 5 things that the hiring people think about. You've got 5 other things to think about. And the first one is, are my values consistent with the business I'm joining and with the people I'll be working for? Because if they're not, you shouldn't be even talking to them. Now, the big problem, of course, is you don't know, people don't walk the talk. They have their value statement up on the internet, and then you find that their workplace is totally different.
But also, I think too, as even when you've been in a role for quite a long time, sometimes you can trip over things that sort of makes you realize there's a conflict that just hadn't been apparent before too. You can be in a company for a long time, or there's a change or issues that are just new that you think, hang on a minute, that doesn't reflect the way I want to work. So that forces you to reevaluate as well.
Yeah, well, I had one woman I was working with, who was chief executive of Australia for a global business. Her boss had been promoted from Australia to run part of the global business, but she was actually performing superbly, much better than he had, and but he was very insecure. So he would call her 10 times a day and second guess what she was doing and question whether it was the right thing and ask her to justify it. She couldn't do her job because she was spending so much time. He was in Europe, she was here. And if we couldn't change that, she needed to leave. So,
absolutely. Well, that's relationship. Every kind of relationship signal there, isn't it? That's not healthy.
No, it was appalling. So we had, there were only a few ways of changing it. He had to go, she had to go, he had to change his behavior, or we had to find some kind of a way of cutting him off.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that's what we worked on. And in the end, we came up with Plan B. If we couldn't fix it in the next 3 months, then she would start to look for something else.
And what did she do? Did she leave, or was she able to fix it? I think that's a very difficult dynamic to fix.
Yeah. Well, it was just where we left for 3 months. She is now a national hero. Everywhere you go, she's actually been pointed to as a role model for young women. So she's still in the job, and I think we have got control of him to some degree now. So I'm somewhat optimistic that this is going to work, even though it went through a very rocky patch. But yeah. So the first thing is values. The second thing is, can I make a big difference? I don't want you treading water, shuffling paper. I want you to make a difference, because if you make a difference, the chances are you'll be good. You'll be held in high regard. You will be a success. The problem is not so much can you make a difference, it's will they let you make a difference? So you need to work that out. Will they let you make a difference? And there could be all sorts of reasons why they won't. They don't have enough money. They're risk averse. They don't recognize your strengths. They don't trust you enough at this point. They've got other things on their mind, and so on. So can you make a difference? The third thing is, where does it lead? You don't want a job that's just going to be a dead-end job. You want to be able to see it as a stepping stone to something else. And how can you work that out? That's an interesting problem. But I think you've got to be fairly upfront with your employee and figure out what do they do to help you develop. What's the program? If they say nothing, then that's a problem, because most of us continue to develop. We need to keep learning. And the world's changing so fast. We need to keep learning. So if you don't have any way of helping me develop, is this the right job for me? The next thing I think you've got to think about is your family. I don't believe you're meant to have a job where you work 100 hours a week and you lose your family. So somehow you've got to get a balance between your family and your job, and that's very important. And then finally, will they pay you enough? I don't see any reason to go backwards. This is a value problem, not a cost problem. Can you add enough value that you are worth paying what you received in the previous job? Some people come to me and say, I can't see how I could earn the same amount going forward. And I say, well, please don't talk about that anymore. Our goal is that you will earn at least as much, if not more, going forward. But we must find somewhere where you add enough value to justify that.
Yeah.
So they're the 5 things I think you have to think about, which is different from the 5 things that the people doing the hiring are thinking about.
Yes. Yes. Now, we've got a couple of questions I'll just point to for a moment in the chat here. There are some examples of professional profiles, absolutely, in the book. So that's most definitely there. And I think one of the things Bill's been hugely generous with is to offer examples of cover letters and CVs and professional profiles, and going as far as using perhaps a little bit of the Amazon method of thinking forward with that sort of that might be my language there, Bill, around, you know, what's my strengths, and if I'm a product, what do I look like? But there's an interesting question here, and I'm curious to know this too, because I think we've all been in positions where we've got colleagues or managers and the relationship is a bit dysfunctional for a while, and we need to execute some sort of reset. And it sounds like this woman that you are working with is not only relatively young, but also has had quite more than just a little bit of success here in rebalancing that very difficult relationship. And what did she do to do that? You know, can you remember some of the steps she took? Because that's really quite an achievement.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, it wouldn't have worked out if she didn't have someone to talk to about it.
Oh, I can imagine.
So, you know, just talking about it quite often is a big help, you know, for the individual. She went to the global HR director and tried to get help from her, but she couldn't help because this fellow was part owner of the firm. So it wasn't she didn't feel she could actually criticize him, which is a problem, by the way, but you know, the relationship wasn't strong enough that she could point that out. But I think
just got a bit of a vested interest. They could well be, you know, trapped like you've just described. So sometimes you need somebody outside that, don't you? Yeah.
But part of the other problem for her was just to build her confidence. That, you know, just have someone to say, look, you're doing the right things. They're the problem, not you. And we need to sort of hang in here and see whether we can make the job more comfortable for you. She'd only been in it for a year and was in the middle of COVID, so it's a terrible time. It's not really the real world. We hope it's not the real world we live in going forward. So there was a lot of extra stresses and strains, and but she was one of these high performance women who she'd gone to London for a meeting 3 weeks before she was due to give birth. She'd come back 1 week before she was due.
They don't normally let you fly then. I know that for personal experience. You've got to hide that belly. They won't let you on.
Yeah, well, somehow she talked her way on. I don't know how she did it. But the point in her case was just to, quite often it's not, people talk about confidence. Really what they should be talking about is courage. You can't change your confidence by sitting around thinking I'm going to become more confident. What you've got to do is take a bit between your teeth and do something. And in her case, well, one thing she did was talk to me, so that she did get some different perspective, not inside the company, because it's very hard to talk to people in the business. You feel very vulnerable, and you're not sure where it'll end up, this discussion. So for her, it was quite good to talk to someone like me. And then I think, and my counsel was, well, let's try to see if we can fix this first, because it's a very good job. It's a high profile. Everyone from the outside would say she was doing everything right. They didn't know what she was having to live with internally.
Yes. She wouldn't want to look like it's affecting her too. She, to the outside world, she wants to look like she's got everything under control, even inside. Yeah. But inside, she might have been falling apart. Yeah. Precisely.
She was, as far as other people were concerned, she was a superstar, but she had no one to talk to. Family she couldn't talk to either, because people don't want to show their weakness or their vulnerability. So in her case, it was important to get sort of another opinion. And oddly enough, she was offered another job while we were talking. And it was in a much more boring business. And
do you mean a much easier job, Bill?
So anyhow, we prepared her, and she, for that job, including how to handle interviews and so on, she used this tell me about yourself very effectively, which I call passion, experience, competence, PEC, which is also in the book. But and the board was split. One part of the board, who were the kind of younger, more innovative members of the board, wanted her, and the older, traditional members of the board felt she was too risky. She would do things that might upset them. So she didn't get the job, which I'm so grateful for, because I was telling her, look, I don't think you want this job. Even if they offer it to you, I think you should refuse it. But it was a very good experience for her to go through that and to find that people, certain people loved her, other people don't. That's life.
Yeah.
It's a bit like auditioning for a part in a musical. You get rejected 20 times, and then finally you get the dream part. It's going to happen in this process as well.
Yes, and it is. I guess it is being patient, and you talk about that a little bit in the book too. Don't take something that really isn't a good fit. Be patient and look for something that is a really good fit, and do the homework so you know what that is. Even more importantly, so you know what that is for you.
Yeah, and it's easy for me to say be patient, but for some people are under financial pressure or whatever. That's not at all easy. But
yes.
I personally would prefer you to do some contracting. I don't like you working more than 3 days a week when you're networking, because you can't network when you have a job. It's just not possible. You are too busy. You're lucky to meet one person a week or one person a month if you've got a job. But if you don't have a job, you can meet 5 people a week. You can really expand your network dramatically when you don't have a job. But you don't have the income either. So, it's a trade-off.
Well, I guess too, for those people here who are employed at the moment, that's, I guess, step one before you launch on this journey, is get your finances in order, isn't it? It's do whatever you can and whatever you can control to put yourself in a position of strength so that you can actually, have that journey. And you can do quite a bit of the preparatory work that you talk about in the book, more slowly while you are employed, when you're not actually looking, if you like, but you're building your foundations, can't you? So you can set yourself up in a really good position before you actually are out of work, assuming you're not in that position where you know that the cliff's coming, it's about to finish.
Yeah, well, that first month where we sort of working out what your strengths are and what your strategy should be, that can be done while you're still at work. It's the networking part that's more tricky when you're at work, because it's just time consuming. To me, you should be spending at least 2 hours preparing for a meeting, trying to understand what makes that person tick. What emotional connection can I join? Who do they know? On LinkedIn, who are they connected to that I'm connected to? How can I use that? All those things. And then you probably need an hour after the meeting to write up your notes and work out what it all means and so on. So, you're spending 4 or 5 hours on a meeting. You don't have that time. You can do that if you've got nothing else to do in a week, but you can't do it if you have a job.
Yes. No, I think that's a really important point, that getting a job is a job, and we need to take it seriously and make sure that we set ourselves up for success. Otherwise, we end up being reactive and taking something that isn't ideal and ending up with a patchy CV and limiting our success too. One of the things that you talked about, I'm a little bit conscious of time, but let's ask you this one. One of the things you said in the book was that you'd set yourself a goal that by the age 40 that you wanted to be a CEO. And as someone who's perhaps lived a more organic life, let's put it that way, I'm always really impressed when I see people thinking, gosh, that's where I want to be and I'm going to shoot for that. Talk us through how that was useful to you and what that led to.
Well, first of all, most people can't do it. They struggle.
To
They
think
say I
about
could
what
do.
they want.
They come up with 3 or 4 things they could do in the next 3 or 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah.
But my job is to say, well, I want the discipline of you saying, if I could wave a magic wand, what would I be doing in 3 or 4 years? And it doesn't have to be a promotion, by the way. It could be a different career. It could be a portfolio career. It could be moving from, I want to be in a not-for-profit business. I want to be in a smaller business. So that it's a good discipline to sort of try to work it out. Now, in my case, it was totally illogical. No, most people, when I left my job as a consultant, said, "What can you do?" I don't even understand what you can do. You're a consultant. What use are they? They take your watch and tell you the time and then charge you and so on. So, but for one reason or another, I decided, I'm 38. I'd like to be running something by the time I'm 40. Well, the very fact that I told people that actually surfaced the idea. Someone said, that's a good idea. We're willing to fund you to do that. And if I hadn't told people that, I'd still be pushing a pen somewhere in a big corporate and filling it, making reports or something. So I'm a big believer in that, just because it worked for me. And I'm a big believer that it's a good exercise for you to do, to sort of say, well, where am I going? Why should it all be so tactical? Why is it just the next job? Why don't I think about where my career is taking me and how do I get there? I may need more credentials. I may need more study. I may need more experience. And by the way, in the book, I talk about pathways. Sometimes in golf you can get a hole in one, but most times you can't. So what do I need to do to get to this 3-year, 4-year goal? And it's got to also be tested with people. I had one young man I was working with who said, I want to be the head of a global multinational business headquartered in Switzerland. He was 30. So I said, well, you've got to be joking. You're not even working for the company yet, and you want to be head of this huge business. You've got to come up with something that people can say, yes, you could do that in 3 years. It might be a pathway to that job, but it's not credible. I think I might have even told him, you look like you don't have very good judgment. And if you say that, people will scratch their heads. So it's got to be feasible. It's got to be tested. A lot of people don't test their thinking enough with people they respect and who want to help them, by the way. If you ask for advice, they want to help you. But, you need people whom you trust, who know you, and who are going to be honest with you about what makes sense to you. And you'll be simply amazed at how much help you'll get from them. Most people don't ask for help.
No, I think that's a really, really great point to sort of close out on. And I think when you're talking there about projecting forward to, what I love is that you're not saying in 10 years, in 20 years, you might have that in your mind as a broader sort of direction. But what you're really saying is within, let's say, the next 5, some sort of visible, achievable, plannable distance, I'd like to achieve X. So you're making it very, very tangible and very concrete, because 3 to 5 years you can sort of plan ahead for, can't you? More than that, life's too, you don't know what opportunities are going to come your way. You're limiting yourself actually by suggesting that you're going to be here that much further away.
Yeah, and that woman I talked about earlier, she had never thought of being a CEO. When she said, I'd like to be in the top management team, people started saying, well, why wouldn't you want to run something? You've got all the skills and capability and drive and energy and credibility to do it. And she basically said, well, I never thought of it.
Yeah. There we go. Oh. Wow. And yet she did it with aplomb too.
Yeah, well, in the end, she didn't do it in a month or something, but she prepared herself properly. She tested it. She built her ABC network, and it delivered.
Yeah.
And it nearly always delivers. No, it's quite extraordinary, really.
Yes.
And people don't do enough networking. They don't. And if they do it in a casual way. Let's have a coffee. I don't like the idea that you have a coffee. I want you to have a working meeting to test your thinking. And you might have a coffee while you're doing it, but you don't have a coffee. No, it's not just a chit chat. It's I've got these hypotheses I want to test with you. That's what I want you to do.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Bill, for being so generous with your time and your ideas and your insights. I think you've been incredibly generous and very, very insightful. And I'm just looking at the chat there at the comments that people have made as they've apologized for having to duck out early because they found the conversation to be so very, very helpful. And if I look at the number of people who are still here, firstly, the number of people who came out of those who registered, and then also the number who've stayed with us to the end, I think that's testimony to the value that you've been able to bring people. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you everyone for coming along. I know that a number of people have already bought your book. They've said so. They've done it while they've been here in the program. And, I hope we see some of you in our working sessions inside Clarity First too. We'd love to be able to help you further. That's something that I think Bill and I both, do with our work is we're very focused on helping other people. And that's certainly the spirit of the book, and also Clarity First as well. So yes, we absolutely will have a recording because I'm aware that a number of you have come in a bit later. If anyone would like to join Clarity First, as I've mentioned, that the doors are open this week. They're open for 7 days, and Luke has just popped the link there in case you don't know anything about the program. We'd love to have you, and we certainly look forward to seeing you again some other time soon. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to talking again some other time soon.
Thank you. My job is to help people reach their full potential, and so I hope it's been helpful in that regard. Just to give you some ideas about how you do that. Most people are very underprepared in this area. That's why I wrote the book. I can't believe it, really. We all sort of pretty ad hoc in this area. So I'd like everyone to be more strategic. That's my message, I think, and use a process. Thank you.
My pleasure. No, thanks again for coming along.